You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan here with Mr. Brett Newcomb.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm doing very well.
So
very happy man.
That's great. As we are recording this, it is the week of the election. Not all results have been tabulated, but it appears to have been a record turnout, which is fantastic. I'm always happy when people go out and participate in the civic compact. But do you have any reflections about where we're at that you want to share before we?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. We live in Missouri, which, for better or worse, is pretty red.
Yes.
So doesn't always necessarily dovetail with your or my political leanings, although we live in St. Louis, which is a pretty liberal area of a very red state.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, so far I haven't been particular. I just want to say one thing.
We'll say it.
Okay. I am so happy that election denialism did not find any traction in this election, and my hope is that that period of our history is now over.
I hope you're right.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really happy with the way that things have been handled and the decorum of 99.9% of people.
Frustrating to me because there has never been any evidence of large-scale election fraud.
Right.
So
ever in the history of the United States.
Right.
Yeah.
So to build a political doctrine based on the foundation of fraud in the elections, to me, is a non-starter. There's no evidence. Mm-hmm. And the Trump administration brought 62 different lawsuits around the country, all of which were dismissed for lack of evidence. Mm-hmm. So when people say, well, it's stolen, like the governor candidate in Arizona, and they are asked, what's your evidence? Show us the data. Where is it? And her response is, it's out there. Mm-hmm. You just don't want to see it.
Well, I mean, Mike Lindell is the poster child for that. We've got all the evidence.
Yeah.
You're going to see it. He's been saying it for 2 years.
All those guys have been saying that.
Yeah.
But they managed to not say it in court because there are legally established consequences for that. And they managed to, in many cases, delay the court dates by appeals and refilings, so that it never comes to a conclusion.
Yeah.
But they keep the pot stirred.
But I'm glad that didn't find traction this
when people voted.
Time around.
Yeah.
And I've been very, very happy with the way that we've.
My bigger concern is the preponderance of people who are unable or unwilling to have conversations. I went out with a very dear friend of mine this week who proudly stated to me, I never discuss politics or religion because people are crazy. And I think that's sad. I think people should be able to discuss things with people with whom they disagree and discuss it courteously, hopefully intelligently, but certainly courteously, and retain their friendships, retain their respect for each other.
So,
I think as a society, we need to more aggressively promote that concept. Let's be able to talk to each other and disagree and still be courteous and respectful and caring of the people with whom we disagree.
And so that's actually a very valid point for our conversation, because I always believed that in therapy it was okay to talk about religion and politics because I want to model for my clients exactly what you're talking about. If we disagree, let's disagree, but let's do that in a courteous way.
I think I would have a different answer about therapy.
Okay.
Because for me, the conversations in therapy are in service of what the client needs. And if I'm talking about politics or religion, I have to be careful not to proselytize or promote my own perspective. I have to hear you. And then I can ask you questions. Like, very regularly, people would come in and be dealing with guilt that they felt was overwhelming. Say they'd had an abortion. They'd killed their baby. And they couldn't forgive themselves for that. And I would ask them, are you religious? Do you have a religious foundation? And many of them would say no, and so then the conversation would go in another direction. But the ones that would say yes, I would then say, what does your faith foundation teach you about forgiveness? What does your church say?
Not about abortion, but about forgiveness. Yeah. I think that's
and so but not ever from a perspective of what I believe about forgiveness or what my church faith teaches about forgiveness, because it isn't about me. It's about hearing you and guiding you to hear yourself as you challenge your own roadblocks.
And I don't think that I would ever bring that up myself. I think I would always do that in response to what the client was talking about, unless I already knew where the client was, and then I might broach the subject. But yeah, I mean, I think that you can have a conversation in therapy about
informationally
anything.
And not argumentatively.
Yeah,
I want to hear your understanding of the topic and the information that drives your understanding of the topic, and then I want to present with you or to you my understanding. And I would like to think I'm always open to learning that I'm wrong. If you can show me factually that I don't know what I'm talking about, I hope that at the end of the conversation I can go, thank you for showing me that, because I didn't know that. But either way, at the end of the conversation, I want to walk away still being close friends.
Yeah, but do you believe that those kinds of topics can be fodder in therapy, specifically because it can create a model for how those conversations can be had with decorum?
Okay, so going back to the theories about psychotherapy.
Yeah.
The fundamental contention that I was taught is that whatever issues exist in the life of the client manifest themselves in the dialogue between the client and the therapist. So they bring to the table who they are. My objective as the clinician is to do reflective listening and present to them, this is what's going on between us. This is how this conversation is developing. I'm wondering if that happens in other places in your life. I'm wondering if your passion, your articulation of your passion, your behavioral response to your passion contribute to the problems you're having at work, or problems you're having in your relationships in your family or with your friends. The way they contribute to misunderstanding, tension, disagreement in the room with me. Because I think that's what therapy is about. Hold up the mirror, reflect it to you so that you can see it.
Yeah.
I'm being non-judgmental. I'm asking you, look at this. Are we seeing this accurately?
Yeah.
And then, is that the way you want it to be? How does that make sense to you?
And so in that way, you would say those conversations can be had as long as it's in service to the therapeutic results that the client is searching for. Yeah. I agree. I agree with that. So,
but my challenge, the whole countertransference issue for me about any of that is not to proselytize. I'm not trying to persuade you to come my way.
Yeah.
I'm trying to help you find the way that you choose to go with an understanding of the cost-benefit ratio for your choices.
No therapy should ever be done in service to the therapist.
Yeah.
I mean, period. I mean, that just has to be the number one. Whether you help people or not isn't as relevant as whether or not you're working for them and not for you. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. So if we think in larger terms of the goal of life, what would you... I've heard people say the goal of life is to be happy. And I've said this on this show before. But you don't agree with that. I don't think I agree with that.
Again, confessing my limitations, I don't know that there is a goal of life other than to just live. To live with the least amount of suffering, the least amount of pain, either experiencing or causing that. So, how do you get through it? We've had conversations about people that we know and love and care about deeply. and we get upset about their behaviors. Like, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing that. And God, I wish they wouldn't do that. And boy, it makes me angry when they do that. And in our discussions, it eventually comes around to, well, but are they happy? You know, are they living the life that makes them happy? Which I think is a good question to bring up in therapy. Are you happy in general with where your life is? And then if you're not, if the answer is no, I'm not happy, then do you see that as being caused by circumstances beyond your control? Life sucks. The Republicans control the state of Missouri, or the Democrats control the state of Illinois, and I'm trapped here. I can't afford to move, and so I'm just going to have to live in this environment. Woe is me. Well, are there things that you can do within that environment to bring you a greater sense of peace or happiness?
And in modern psychology, they call that self-efficacy. When you and I were going to school, they called it locus of control, whether or not you had control over your own suffering. And what I wonder, though, is, so this is my philosophy, is that the goal of life, I'm just using that term, just to use a term, the goal of life is not necessarily to be happy, but to live with integrity. I think when you live in accordance with what your core values are, that you are living an honest, sincere life. And when you're not, you're not. And
I think you're just probably a deeper thinker than I am. My goal is to get through this day without screwing up, causing pain, or experiencing pain.
But you live, you know that you live your life with integrity. You live your life within the core values that you believe are important. You do.
I know that that's the image I project.
You don't think you do in reality?
You know, drawing the lines between doing therapy and being a person. I see people in the environment that I have visceral reactions to. And I'm like, oh my God, can you believe that? Look at that person. Can you believe that? But in therapy, if that person walks in the room, my job, my integrity requires me to be open to seeing them as they present themselves. Here's who I am. I'm in your office. This is what I'm struggling with in my life. What I've learned is, through many, many years of doing it, if I take the time to position myself to be receptive to someone, and I spend time with them, I invariably find things about them to respect and to admire and to appreciate. Even if there are things that initially are off-putting to me because of my own biases, my own conditioning. So I have to learn to separate myself into my relaxed, not at work persona and my at work persona, and be aware that I'm two different people. I can go into a situation and be nasty. I can go into a situation and be contemptuous. I can go into a situation and be shocked. But in therapy, I can't do that. I can't be any of those things, no matter what the presenting person or topic is, or I can't do the job. And if I get a client that I can't reposition myself to do that, I need to not treat them. Refer them on to someone else. I can't work with you. But always confess that it's my failing. There's a problem with me getting out of my own damn way. I can't hear you. You shouldn't have to pay for that. Let me send you to somebody that ain't going to have that problem. But if I can get out of my own way and be open to you, then I think I can help you.
Right. But going back to that question about integrity, do you believe that you live your life according to a foundational set of standards that you have for yourself?
I hope so.
And if so, do you think that is that because okay, so can you live an integral life and be unhappy? My question or my answer would be yes, of course you can.
Yeah. I can be unhappy that there is food insecurity in St. Louis.
Right.
And if I know somebody that personally that's food insecure, am I going to do something about it? Am I going to take them a meal? Am I going to give them some groceries?
And I think that's what I'm talking about with integrity, is that if you feel like that you're unhappy because there's food insecurity, and yet you know a person who is food insecure and you don't do anything to rectify that, I think that's not integral.
The data shows that suicide among the elderly is increasing exponentially. The subset data speaks to the fact that they're lonely. So if you know an elderly person that lives alone, do you then reach out to them?
Mm-hmm.
Do you say, hey, how are you doing? Just checking in. Wanted to say, hello, can I go to the grocery store for you?
Right.
Can I bring you can I cut your grass? Whatever. Do you do those things? Or do you just sit back and go, that's really sad?
Right. And that's why I'm so hung up on this idea of integrity, because we have the best health care. People are living longer than ever. And yet people who are elderly have a quality of life that is less than what they would think of as optimal, hence the exponential suicide rate for the elderly.
Optimal or acceptable?
Yeah.
Or they reach a point where they say, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. And should they have the right?
Well, I was just going to say,
I'm ready to check
separate.
out.
Yeah, we should separate out a question about, do you have the right? 'Cause I personally feel like everybody has the right to be self-directed. But if we just don't even think about that, and we just say, okay, where is this epidemic coming from? Why do we have such great health care and elders who are living healthy? Their bodies are physically healthier for longer than at any time in recorded history, and yet there's this dissatisfaction with that quality of life. There's a disconnect there. And it's something that we need to think about, because we're all going to get older. So then that brings me back to this idea of happiness. So let's take our break, and when we come back, let's look at some of the in the article. It has habits of unhealthy people. Let's unpack some of that and see what we think about that.
All right.
Hey, Brett, if you were going to tell somebody to check out something on the internet to help them with their mental health, what would you tell them?
I tell them, listen to Psych with Mike.
Why would you tell them that?
Because it's probably one of the most easily listenable experiences you can have that will give you information that's useful for a whole spectrum of concerns that people have.
I agree, and I have actually been told that by at least a dozen people, several of whom were not married to me, and some of them didn't even know me.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. It's when we get that kind of feedback from people, it is so incredibly humbling and overwhelming for me.
It is for both of us.
Yeah. So we really appreciate it. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back. And if we start talking about these qualities of, or these habits of an unhealthy lifestyle, I'm looking at these and I'm saying, oh yeah, I do that. Oh yeah, I do that. Oh yeah, I do that.
That's because you're sick.
Well, that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Is now, but I also, from a clinical perspective, can look at these things and say, oh, I see how that's a snare, how living that way leads to a lot of what I call cognitive dissonance, so the inability for the human brain to comfortably hold two conflicting thoughts, and creates a tremendous amount of anxiety. Just that first one, waiting on the future, I've been doing that my whole life, saying, you know what, next week it's going to get better, or next year it's going to get better, or when I get this degree, it's going to get better.
You set a goal. When I get my next promotion, when I get my next raise, when I get my new job, when I get this, if I win this election, if I do whatever, then it'll be, if I get my car paid off, if I just get my credit cards paid off. It was interesting to me that this study, it was in Forbes magazine, said that they had done research about poverty, and that when people manage to earn the equivalent of $20,000 in income a year or more, once they hit $20,000, it's like the Maslow thing, hierarchy.
Yeah.
You got to have food, you got to have water.
That's the break-even point.
So when you reach, and that the break-even point seemed to be $20,000 of earnings,
which we would point out is below the poverty line.
Yeah. So then you start to include other factors. When we're dealing with people that are severely depressed, clinically depressed.
But let's finish that point. So $20,000, if you were making less than $20,000, and you got to a point where you were making $20,000, that significantly improves your quality of life and your happiness. Beyond that, it didn't. It didn't have an effect on their perception of happiness.
You can't just live in the pursuit of more.
Right.
And that's not the answer to
exactly
the existential question. So when we're dealing with people that are clinically depressed, one of the things that we encourage them to do to fight their depression, do something for someone else. Go and do something for someone else, and it will help you feel better. And so looking at this article and reading through all of it, one of the things that's pretty emphasized is the importance of socializing and serving others. If you isolate, if you shut yourself down into your own home, your own room, you don't come out, you don't interact with your family, if you get more angry, you get more depressed, it deteriorates. It's like staring in your navel. So you have to be more active, and you have to be more social, and that needs to be in service of something other than you.
Right.
And then there are ancillary payoffs to you. At least that's what this is saying in terms of not being unhappy. So you can find joy looking out the window. You're not going to find it looking in the mirror.
But I think that is a hard sell to say to a client or to say to anybody who is feeling like that they're in a bad way, to say, you've got to focus. If you can't be happy now, you're never going to be happy. And that person looks at us and says, you
can't have enough to be happy.
Yeah, you don't understand.
Well, I like that they quote Benjamin Franklin in the article. So the Constitution only gives people the right to pursue happiness. You have to catch it yourself.
So you are then actually talking about not just that first one, but the third one which is stay home. Don't isolate yourself. That's never gonna. You're never gonna be happy.
Let's run through the list.
Sure.
The number one is waiting for the future. We talked about that. If I'll be happy once I reach the next level.
Right.
Number two is spending too much time and effort to acquire things. If I could just get a Maserati, then I would be, oh my God, life would be so good. Number three is staying home. If you just stay home and isolate, isolation is a critical factor there. That's not going to bring you the happiness that you would think. Number four is seeing yourself as a victim. I'm a victim of life. I'm a victim of somebody else. They always screw me over. They always get things. A lot of racism is driven by that. A lot of the whole political concern expressed by the right wing in America today is the declining percentage of white population in America is becoming too brown, too colored, and that represents the end of America as we know it. Well, yeah, it does, because we're not going to be the predominant number.
But the liberal agenda does the opposite. It says, oh, everybody has the right to be a victim. And so
to be a victim. You have a right to be a loser.
But that's essentially what the liberal agenda says, is that you have a right to perceive yourself as a victim, and we have the responsibility to take care of you when you do. And I don't know that is a healthy message. I'm not sure
that I agree with that interpretation of that. You have the right to see yourself as a victim, and I have the responsibility to take care of you. So you think that's a liberal reaction, and conservatives would say take care of yourself?
Yes, I think that is that's the presumption is that the liberal agenda is we will take care of you, and the conservative agenda is you must take care of yourself. I think and obviously that's painting with a very, very broad brush.
Yeah, it's an oversimplification.
Right. But I think that is perceptually the underlying message.
I would reframe that. Maybe it's the same way to say it, that the liberal agenda would be to say that you have the right to pursue your dreams. You have the right to live the way you want to live.
Right. The
conservative agenda would be to say you need to live the way I want you to, because I know these things are better for you.
And so I would push back on that by saying, so the liberal agenda, the message may be you have the right to pursue your dreams, but then if I say, oh, well, the man's keeping me down, so I can't pursue my dreams, then the liberal agenda says, well, we got to get rid of that, whatever those obstacles are. And I just think that sometimes, you have to live by pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. And I'm not saying there is not any legitimate reason for anybody to ever perceive themselves as a victim. I'm not saying that at all.
So let's be specific if we can, and pick a topic.
Sure.
The abortion controversy in America. I personally do not believe in abortion.
Right.
Would not support anyone I know having one unless there were specific circumstances that make sense to me, like rape or incest or health of the mother. To me, you have to offer those options. But I really don't like the idea of the government saying that a woman cannot be in charge of her own body and make her own healthcare decisions about herself and her life. Economic decisions, if she's forced to carry children to term and raise them, and then society doesn't do anything about daycare or food or health for those babies, I have real issues with that.
Yeah.
So I don't think it should be a government or church-based decision that controls the option. So that makes me liberal. But conservatively, I mean, I adopted a child, and I'm grateful. It was a blessing in my life that I adopted a child. I would encourage more people to adopt children. Children that exist, children that need homes, children that need families and love and education and food and clothing. If you have some to spare, get out there and provide it. But I don't believe that the conservative government should be able to outlaw this because of some subset of religious beliefs that they have that's wrong.
And if we just talk about abortion, the issue.
And I'm opposed to abortion.
My problem with the conceptualization of that as an issue in our society is that it comes from, it takes into account the wrong perspective. So my issue of abortion has nothing to do with the woman who's pregnant.
So what does it have to do with?
It has to do with the well-being of the child. And so if you are...
So you would argue that from the point of viability?
No. I argue from the point of emotional regulation. So if you are a woman, okay, if you're a woman and you get pregnant, and you don't want that child, then I don't think that anybody should force you to have a child that you don't want because of the ramifications of how you are then going to raise that child.
Waiting for you to get to that point, because right now it's argued that the life of that child,
right,
at least it's argued among those more extreme conservatives, the life of that child is equal to or more important than the life of the mother, the quality of life of the mother, the health life of the mother.
Right.
I think that is a decision that's a complicated, critical decision that the choices need to be made by the mother and her physicians.
Right.
Not by the government.
And my position is that we're never going to, I don't think we're ever going to resolve this issue, but we're never going to get to the nut of it until we start thinking in terms not of, do I force you because of a religious conviction to carry a child that you don't want, until we start having conversations about, if I do that, what are the consequences to the child, until we start thinking about what is in the best interest of the child.
That's never been the real focus.
No, it's not. It isn't. But that's the
for instance,
the issue.
After the Dobbs decision was made by the Supreme Court, the Republican political machines began to say, well, now we can move to outlaw contraception. Because we just don't want you to have sex unless you're married and unless you can have babies.
Right.
Otherwise, you shouldn't have sex. It's a sin. I don't want the government making those decisions about who I can have sex with, who I can love, who I can marry.
I agree 100%.
What I can do. And the consequences of loving, marrying, whatever, with someone, having sex with someone, may be that there is a pregnancy. Whether or not that pregnancy needs to be forced to continue shouldn't be a government policy decision. And in all of those discussions, I don't hear any conversation about the responsibility of the men involved. What is a man's responsibility not to get a woman pregnant? So do you require men to use contraceptives? Do you make men financially responsible for pregnancies that they generate? And
I don't disagree with anything that you're saying on the on the surface, as far as you're making the points. I'm just saying that those are all false flags. That the issue isn't about any of that. It's about what is the well-being of the child, and is that child going to be raised
for you
to be able to be able to emotionally regulate? And no one is even, we haven't even had that conversations. No one's ever even considered that.
I think the issue is about power and control. I don't think it's about anything else, power and control, because I believe it, and I want to force you to behave the way I believe.
I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm just saying I think that those are all false flags. I don't think that those are. I don't
think the welfare of the child ever enters into the discussion.
Exactly, and that's why I'm saying that's where the whole thing goes awry for me. and goes off the rails is that we're talking about, I mean, if there is any invested entity in this conversation, it's the child. And the question is, what is the well-being of the child? If you are forced to raise a child that you do not want, is that child's quality of life going to be good? My answer would be probably not. Does that mean that it's okay to abort that child? I'm not even getting into that. I'm just saying, until we actually construct the argument in a salient way, then we're just tilting at windmills.
I'm mindful of a song by Ray Stevens. Would Jesus wear a Rolex on his television show? Mm-hmm. And if you look at the lyrics in that song, one subset of the lyrics, one stanza is, and would he admit to speaking to all of those preachers who claim they've been talking to him? Mm-hmm. I just happen to be very cynical and skeptical about that kind of stuff.
And to the extent that these very, very relevant social issues impact individuals and their happiness, I think those are real issues for them and real issues for therapy. But as a society, I don't know that I think that we're hitting the bullseye. I think we're like I said before, tilting at windmills. People are satisfying their own agendas.
I think that is because the goal of society is not to promote happiness. Yeah. It's to promote social stability and control of a system that you live within. And people are fighting over the control levers. I want it to be this way. I want it to be that way. I don't think 21-year-olds should be able to buy a long gun. I don't think that 18-year-olds should be able to drink. I don't think that women should be able to have sex. I don't think that men should. So I want to be in charge. I don't want you in charge because I don't trust you.
Right. Yeah. Well, then maybe that's really what it comes down to is, can we all learn to
if you just
be able
do
to trust
what
each other a little bit
that's
more?
Right. If you just let me be in charge.
So if you have any questions or comments about this topic or any other, and I know that we kind of got into the weeds here a little bit.
But it made us happy, didn't it?
It did make us happy, and I thought it was a very relevant conversation. You can send those questions to us at psychwithmike.com. We would love to hear from people. If you have things you would like us to discuss or you have any questions about anything that you have ever heard us talk about, please reach us there. If you want to reach Brett directly, you can send those messages to Psych with Mike, and they will get directly to him, because I know that there are people out there who would like for him to be more the focus of the show.
Who want to say, oh yeah, we had a conversation. I had a conversation with a dear friend this weekend, and I told him that he was too masturbatory. And he thought I was saying something sexual. And I said, no. A masturbatory person is a person who believes that things must be a certain way. And I think that's part of the problem. Too many of us are masturbatory.
Absolutely. Shouldistic and masturbatory.
There you go.
If you have a desire to do us a favor, what you can do is go on the interwebs, and you can find us on the YouTube's Psych with Mike and subscribe to the show. We would love that.
Feedback is a gift. Good feedback is an even nicer gift.
Is an even nicer gift.
Yeah.
And you can find us on Apple Podcasts and leave us a comment and a rating, and that helps other people find the show, which we really, really appreciate. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.